Imagine a city at the base of a shattered mountain. Massive chunks of rock are suspended in the air above, floating, motionless. These islands are tethered together, and lightning arcs beneath them in a silent storm of magical energy. Atop the largest island is a regal palace, and surrounding it, on the smaller islands, are several towers of various sizes. This is the dragonborn city of Kavir. Over 100 years ago, in the arid lands of Autria, civil war engulfed the region. Dragons ruled this land, and dragons fought each other in a vicious clash for power. The skies were set ablaze with fire and lightning, and the common folk tried their best to avoid the dragon's fury. One of these great terrors of the sky was a particularly callous and tyrannical red dragon by the name of Voraxis. Voraxis held a high rank within the ruling class of dragons in Autria, and he commanded an army of red dragonborn. During this ferocious war, Voraxis himself killed the mate of a blue dragon named Zabenzaz before grievously wounding her and destroying all of her unhatched eggs. Voraxis left Zabenzaz to die, alone and bleeding out in some rocky mountain pass. Sometime later, the tide of war shifted, and Voraxis' side began to suffer loss after loss. Seeing the writing on the wall and sensing the inevitable, Voraxis took what was left of his dragonborn and left the rain-shadowed lands of Autria for good, crossing the border mountains into a region with much more greenery and many fewer dragons. However, Voraxis left something unfinished before his cowardly escape. Zabenzaz yet lived. After her defeat, she spent many years recovering and scheming. In the weeks following their exodus, these vagrant dragonborn and Voraxis explored this new region before eventually settling at the base of a lone mountain in some rocky highlands. The reason they picked this specific spot was because this mountain was actually a volcano. Voraxis loved volcanoes and any kind of geothermal activity, and combining that with the abundance of land and resources, this was the perfect spot. However, they weren't the only society in these lands. Long before the dragonfolk came here, there were Goliaths. There still are Goliaths, they're just not quite where they used to be. To be honest, I think the official Goliath lore and cultures are pretty cool, so I'm not going to change much. They're a large, pale-skinned, nomadic people who live a hunter-gatherer lifestyle in tightly knit tribes. I think where I want mine to differ is that mine, compared to the official lore, don't see every single thing as a competition or challenge. There's still a lot of that mindset, but mine aren't quite as obsessive about that. For the Goliaths in this region, hunting is a big part of their culture, so they greatly value the spirit of the hunt and fair competition. At the same time though, they also value cunning and wit, being able to outsmart one's opponent. So they're not just big dumb giant people who say, "Hell yeah, brother," to every test of strength. In that same spirit of having a keen and cunning mind, I want to borrow a little bit of Norse culture, specifically flyting and skalds. Flyting was like a form of verbal combat, two people exchanging insults but through verses. Basically, rap battles. The winner was usually decided by the reactions of the spectators. Skalds, in Old Norse culture, were poets who would create and recite poems about great deeds, notable people, and historical events. If one of the Goliaths succeeded on a challenging or impressive hunt, or accomplished some great deed, they would be expected to create some verses about them to share around the bonfire that night. I like the idea of the Goliaths being talented with language and having traditions of passing down their stories and legends and history verbally. They don't really write much down, so most of their traditions and lore are kept alive this way. They're not exactly philosophers asking deep, hard-hitting questions and attempting to understand what it means to be alive. They're just very observant and very aware of how things are. They'll engage in flyting to settle disputes sometimes, or even just for fun, and each tribe will have a dedicated skald to preserve all of their lore. Another aspect of their culture is that they're kind of shamanistic, practicing and engaging in different types of nature magic. They're not exactly druids who can shapeshift into animals, but they definitely have a connection to nature and the elements. Normally, the Goliath tribes of this land would spend their summers in the cooler, mountainous regions, and then their winters in the plains and forests and highlands. They migrate seasonally so they don't use up all of an area's resources. Nature would have time to essentially restock during the seasons where the Goliaths aren't there. Most tribes kept small herds of grazing animals like cattle or goats or sheep, and they grow some crops, planting them one season and eventually coming back to them one of the following seasons. Initially, the dragonfolk and the Goliaths shared a neutral tolerance of each other. Not really hostile, but also not exactly friendly either. But over time, they came into conflict over resources and territory. It also didn't help that, while the Goliaths didn't exactly worship the volcano or see it as a god, it's still a big part of the shamanistic side of their culture. The Goliaths didn't like that these outsiders came in and took over one of their beloved landmarks and monuments. Throughout this period of time, the dragonborn were slowly expanding their territory out from their fledgling city of Kavir. They were establishing settlements on this new frontier so they could acquire much-needed supplies and resources to send back home. This caused them to get into further conflict with the Goliaths. Normally, the Goliaths would use the region around the volcano as their hunting grounds, but the dragon's expansion caused them to either migrate elsewhere or fight back. Some tribes chose to cut their losses and move on, but others didn't want their land taken from them, so they pushed back against the foreign invaders. The Goliaths didn't have numbers on their side, but what they lacked in quantity, they made up for with quality. In direct confrontation, the Dragonborn were a formidable force against the Goliaths, but many tribes were smart and avoided direct conflict as much as possible, electing for guerrilla warfare tactics like ambushes, traps, or hit-and-run strategies. They knew the terrain much better than the Dragonborn at this point, so they were going to use every advantage in their arsenal. However, unfortunately for the Goliaths, the Dragonborn forces were too much to handle. The Goliaths weren't nearly as organized compared to their draconic foes. The tribes, who were neutral with each other at best and hostile at worst, came close to uniting against their common enemy, and were even starting to work together on their raids and ambushes. But Voraxis grew agitated with their continued resistance, so he began to involve himself in the conflict, destroying entire tribes with fire and fury. After that, most of the tribes saw no hope for reclaiming their land, so they backed out of the region around the volcano. From there, the Dragonborn built their city and its walls over about 60 years, slowly expanding both the city itself and their territory around it. Noble houses were formed, as they were able to acquire wealth from trading with other neighboring cities and territories, and in order to protect themselves and to enforce their frontier claims, their military developed greatly as well. In the aftermath of fleeing from the Autrian Civil War, these Dragonborn vowed to never again suffer such a military defeat. A strong militant culture was formed, with martial prowess being highly valued in this growing society. The Dragonborn of Kavir are a proud and driven people. They put things like honor, duty, and purpose above all else, and are always seeking to surpass the efforts of not only their peers, but themselves as well. They constantly strive for improvement and perfection, with many of them being skilled laborers and craftsmen. The people of Kavir are divided into a kind of caste system, with the people being born into their status. At the top of this hierarchy is Voraxis. He spends most of his time lounging around the volcano and governing when absolutely necessary, occasionally striking fear into his subjects when they need a reminder of who is in charge. Below him are the nobility. These Dragonborn consist of the highest of the noble houses and are at the top of the social food chain. They're involved in pretty much any kind of white-collar fantasy work you could imagine. Owning multiple businesses, owning land or farms outside the city, high-end merchants, politicians to actually run things. I should also mention that the highest ranks of the military fit within this caste, and are usually considered heroes of the people due to their great deeds they've had to accomplish in order to achieve their ranks. That brings me to the next tier, the military. From the high-ish officers down to the lowly foot soldiers, the military of Kavir is generally well respected. They are the city's protectors and secure the lands around them. They train diligently and also police the streets, for better or worse. Many of the soldiers are trained as talented warriors, and those skills are dearly needed for the threats they face beyond the walls of their city. The next caste consists of the laborers, your usual fantasy common folk and peasants. Farmers, craftsmen, builders, merchants, any kind of labor that keeps the city running. The common folk of Kavir take great pride in their work and are always seeking to improve, whether it's because of their patriotism, to appease their nobles, or just to hone their craft. The last and bottommost tier in this caste system are the kobolds and dishonorables. Kobolds are generally used for menial tasks and labor, cleaning the streets, housekeeping, servants, harvesting crops, lots of physical labor. Some kobolds get to work as assistants for craftsmen or certain businesses, but those positions are highly coveted. A kobold needs to go above and beyond and have some luck in order to get one of those jobs. They aren't quite slaves, since they do make a little money and have freedom, but they make much less compared to regular dragonborn citizens. They usually live in the slums of the city in densely packed, kobold-filled homes and apartments. They aren't exactly pleased with their place in this society, but at the same time, they're offered protection by the military, housing and safety within the walls of the city, and are kind of considered citizens, so it's rare for them to voice their dissatisfaction. However, there was one notable time that happened. During the construction of the city's walls, there was a massive kobold revolt. Due to the city not having many resources at the time, since it was still developing, the kobolds weren't being fed very much, and they were being worked to the bone. Whether they were mining stone or hauling the bricks, doing all of that intense labor on an empty stomach caused their rage to boil over, so they began to riot. During one of these riots, the kobolds managed to destroy a sizable chunk of the wall they had been working on, knocking their progress back a considerable amount. The kobolds demanded to be treated better. They wanted less strenuous working conditions, and they wanted a fair amount of food for their hard work. Voraxis used the military to forcefully quell the riots, but he knew that he would need the kobolds' labor going forward, so he agreed to their terms. However, he also rounded up the ringleaders of these riots and had them executed, as both a warning and a reminder of what will happen if they dare to rise against him again. Beside the kobolds in this bottom rung of the social ladder are the dishonorables. Any dragonborn who has brought great shame to their family or broken serious laws. These dragonborn are considered outcasts and don't have the same rights or privileges as the regular dragonborn. They'll work the same jobs for the same pay as the kobolds, but if they're lawbreakers, then they'll be sent to the Black Talon prison several miles away from the city and used for prison labor as they serve out their sentences. They can also be sent out to the frontier settlements for cheap and much-needed labor to keep those places running. While all of this was happening and developing, Zabenzaz spent decades recovering from her wounds and plotting her revenge. She had heard rumors about Voraxis fleeing the country, so she followed those rumors to his new home. In addition to her skills in espionage, she was also an extremely powerful mage, and her hatred for Voraxis and desire for revenge were going to drive her to push the boundaries of her abilities. She discovered that a pair of ley lines, magical veins that course deep into the earth and affect things like weather, climate, and even magical energies around the world, were very close to intersecting under Mount Doru, the volcano where Voraxis had settled. Normally, ley lines naturally intersect around many parts of the world, sometimes causing strange or abnormal occurrences. But if two of them were ever to unnaturally intersect, that could disrupt the flow of magical energies and cause a catastrophe. And that's exactly what Zabenzaz planned for, though it would not be easy. While Voraxis spent decades constructing his city and expanding his territory, Zabenzaz performed magical rituals to slowly nudge the ley lines closer together, like tightening braces on teeth to correct their position. She also spent this time gathering intelligence under disguise, getting to know not only the people, but especially the noble houses. As it turned out, not everyone was pleased with the tyrannical rule of Voraxis, and not everyone was happy with their status in this caste system. Zabenzaz began curating a close-knit circle of allies who were eager for change. Some of them were influential figures like politicians and landowners, while others held high ranks in the military. Most of the nobles she recruited were on the middle or lower end of the nobility social ladder, people with wealth and power, but had plenty of desire for more. There were a few of the highest of the high nobles, but she was very careful with them since many of them were already pleased with their place in this society. The dragonborn in this setting look upon dragons with great reverence and envy, so Zabenzaz, as a dragon herself, very cautiously revealed her true identity to this close circle of traitors. Zabenzaz promised these dragonborn prominent roles in this new hierarchy of hers, should they succeed. Any dragonborn not in this circle would have their allegiances tested, swear their loyalty to Zabenzaz and the new order, or die. Those who accepted their new leader would be able to keep their current positions, but the dragonborn who helped her accomplish her goal would be elevated to the highest of statuses. So, on one fateful day, some 60 years after Voraxis settled in this new land, Zabenzaz and her traitorous allies staged their coup. Voraxis loved to bathe in the volcano's magma and breathe in its noxious fumes, even more so than glittering treasure. So Zabenzaz waited for him to enter his molten bath before performing the final magic ritual to move the ley lines into place. She also had one of the nobles send a messenger to Voraxis, carrying a message that read, "Enjoy your bath, Zabenzaz." After years of being slowly nudged, the ley lines finally intersected directly under the volcano, causing pure magical energy to erupt up into the volcano's magma chamber and unleash a cataclysmic explosion. The blast wave instantly vaporized Voraxis and nearly shattered the entire mountain. Massive chunks of rock were sent flying outwards, but they were quickly suspended in place from the sheer amount of magic now in the air. Where once there was fiery, molten rock, there was now raw, magical energy pulsating and flowing. Lightning arced and surged in the crater where Voraxis and his beloved volcano once were. Zabenzaz had finally avenged her family. In the immediate aftermath, her loyalists began their part of the coup, securing the military and locking down the city with a kind of martial law. There was some amount of infighting in the confusion, but Zabenzaz swiftly descended upon the city and revealed herself to the people of Kavir. She promised a new order, one which would embrace and continue their long-standing traditions, yet would also elevate their civilization to new heights. Kavir was sent into civil turmoil. Those who were complicit in the coup urged everyone else to swear loyalty to Zabenzaz, claiming that she would indeed lead their civilization into a new, prosperous age. Some of the Dragonborn immediately jumped ship and pledged their loyalty. Many others were unsure of their new potential leader, and some even tried to rebel against her. A few of the noble houses and military leaders that were loyal to Voraxis led this resistance, but they were quickly and overwhelmingly struck down by Zabenzaz and her new allies. With this new order established, the citizens of Kavir accepted their fate, either with open arms or quiet resentment. In recognition of their loyalty, Zabenzaz, again a highly skilled mage, rewarded her loyalist circle by infusing them with the magical energies of Mount Doru, turning their scales from red to blue, and granting them wings capable of flight. Now, I know Dragonborn don't usually have wings, but I think it's a cool development. Anyways, these blue, winged Dragonborn became the new highest class of nobility. Zabenzaz even began to teach some of those nobles how to use magic, one of the highest honors she could grant a citizen of Kavir. To commemorate this new age, Zabenzaz ordered the most skilled builders of the city to help her terraform the floating chunks of rock into habitable islands. They then tethered these islands together with chains and bridges, and constructed a royal palace for Zabenzaz to reside in, and also to host exquisite parties and political meetings for the nobility. A large elevator called the Great Lift was made so people could go to and from the city, though only the nobility were allowed up there. They also constructed homes and towers on these islands for the most elite of this new ruling class, even establishing a college for aspiring mages. Magic is now a highly revered tool in this society, and the mages spend their days developing useful magics and furthering their own powers, sometimes under the direct guidance of Zabenzaz, though it's a rare treat to experience her tutelage, since she spends most of her time on her own projects. I'm going to circle back on that in a little bit. Fast forward to 40 years later, the present day. The city is thriving and expanding its territory even further. They face some resistance from the Goliaths out in their frontier settlements, but those are usually small skirmishes, since the Goliaths have a difficult time combating Kavir's military strength. They have established trade routes with other cities, territories, and nations, and they're slowly becoming a dominant political power in this region. The people, as they have been for over 100 years, are constantly driven by their pride and perfectionism. But now there is also the chance to ascend to the winged status if one is able to accomplish a truly great feat. Maybe a heroic military accomplishment, or a craftsman finally completing their masterwork. However, if someone goes out of their way to try to accomplish a truly great feat and then fails catastrophically, that could bring a tremendous amount of shame and dishonor upon their family. These ascensions are rare though, and once per year Zabenzaz will perform the ritual if there is anyone worthy of that honor. Though sometimes several years can go by without a single ascension, she is very careful with who she chooses so as not to devalue its meaning, and also to keep the balance of the caste system in check. As the ruler of Kavir, she is still somewhat tyrannical, but in different ways compared to Voraxis. Where Voraxis was all about strength and might and shows of force, Zabenzaz prefers a much more subtle approach. Her spy network always has its ear to the ground for any signs of internal tension or discontent. She prefers to handle the internal issues quietly in order to keep up the illusion that everything is fine and pleasant. If a noble, whether they are winged or wingless, begins to become a nuisance or a threat to her, she will bestow them with the honor of overseeing one of the frontier settlements, effectively exiling them from the city while still utilizing them. For the lower-class criminals and dishonorables, Zabenzaz has a much more nefarious use for some of the worst offenders. She is always seeking to improve the physical form of the dragonborn with her magically induced evolution rituals, but in order to push the boundaries of her magic, she needs to test it. Within the royal palace, Zabenzaz will use these lawbreakers and dishonorables as test subjects for various types of enhancements, whether it's giving them super strength, empowering their breath attacks, or strange niche effects like their scales changing colors like a chameleon for camouflage. These experiments are performed in extreme secrecy, and very few people know about them. Since dragonborn are an artificially created species, her goal is to perfect them, though even she doesn't know what that end result may look like. She is very cautious about how she does this, since she doesn't want them to become powerful enough to overthrow her. It's a delicate tightrope for her to walk. The dragonborn of Kavir are almost certainly xenophobic to some degree. They aren't exactly hostile to outsiders, since trade is a big part of their economy, but I don't see them as being super accommodating either. I imagine there are some amount of non-dragonborn species in Kavir, but they're easily in the minority. I don't think most of the dragonborn would look down on those other species. They just assume that dragonborn are inherently better, if that makes any sense. Alright, so that's the setup for this setting. Like always, feel free to use this for your own game, and if there's anything you would use or change, I'd love to hear about it. Thanks for watching.